And the other thing to keep in mind is that when I say the gap junctions allow current to equalize between two cells, this is not just a giant syncytium where everything just ends up at the same voltage, because both many of the ion channels and the gap junctions themselves are voltage sensitive. So what you have there is a voltage sensitive current conductor, aka a transistor. So all of these things mediate very rich feedback loops, both positive and negative feedback loops, and that's why it can self-regionalize. So it's not. I like to think it's not an accident that Alan Turing, who was very interested in intelligence and computation and other media and reprogrammability and all of that, he also wrote one of the first papers on a chemical model of morphogenesis, trying to understand how does order come spontaneously from a well mixed set of chemicals. Mm-hmm. And I think I think he was onto this idea that there's a profound symmetry between the self-assembly of bodies and the self-assembly of minds, and that evolution happens to like bioelectricity for all of these things, but there's a much more fundamental thing going on here, which is that you have to align and coordinate your subunits towards higher order goals in spaces that they know nothing about. Mm-hmm. And this is, I think, works the same way.
Yeah, and when we start to think about some of this stuff, it gets interesting and I think difficult. So when you have a higher order goal, I guess the question I want to get to is something like, if we talk about morphogenesis and some of the things from the developmental biology side of this, how does a clump of tissue that doesn't have neurons, doesn't have a thing that we normally think of as the thinking stuff, how does it know, if I want to make my hand and I've got 5 digits and it's supposed to have 5 digits because most of us have 5 digits. Occasionally that goes wrong and some people might have more or less, but I'm supposed to have 5 digits in this morphological pattern in this exact shape. How does the tissue that's developing into my hand have a goal in mind, so to speak? How is that actually encoded in terms of these voltage maps that where these analog information signals live and propagate?
Yeah, I mean the first thing that just to mention, and people say this all the time, is how could a clump of cells have goals, especially if they're not neural cells? And they say, well, how do your neural cells have goals? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then, I guess I don't know. Although at some point, that's not a great answer to this. Although at some point, say, well, it has something to do with the bioelectricity, the electrophysiology. I say, perfect, exactly the same way. And so, also to be clear, when I say goal, I don't mean some sort of human level metacognitive. I know what my goal is. I'm happy about my goal. I don't mean any of that.
Yeah, but there is a destination that's pre-specified. Yeah.
Absolutely, and so I just want to point this out, that I'm not claiming second order metacognition. What I'm saying is, as in a basic homeostatic cybernetic type of system, there's a recorded set point which serves as the target of an error minimization scheme. So that what's happening here is that there is a set point, and you've got a system that's able to measure current state, it's able to access the memory of the target state, and as long as those two things are far enough apart, it's going to work hard to try to reduce the error to acceptable levels, right? Mm-hmm. So this is, we have, it's no longer magical to say that machines have goals. We now have a mature science, cybernetics and so on, where we can actually cash this out in mechanisms. And so this is of course not how people describe developmental biology normally. What developmental biology is typically, the story is described in a very open loop, feed forward kind of way, that you have a bunch of cells, they follow local rules, almost like a cellular automaton, they all follow local rules, and then they say, well, then there's emergence, meaning that if you do enough things in large numbers, eventually something complex will emerge.